Hello and welcome to the first official episode of the Parentreneur podcast. I'm your host, Jake Haynes. Before we get into this episode today, I just want to kind of set some ground rules, better articulating really what I want this to be. I've talked to some other people who are in the kind of space that I am in, or maybe situation of wanting to start their own businesses. What I hear is just people want to hear more about the hardships, the kind of like raw sneak peek of what's going on in starting your own business as aspiring entrepreneur and parent. And so that's really what I want to set the pace for this podcast is, open conversation to where, yes, I have a successful company now, but there's a lot of hardships along the way. Tell you what I've learned about it. We interview other entrepreneurs who've been successful as parents and starting their own company, and then maybe even potentially following some parent entrepreneurs as they go through the process of starting something and getting it off the ground. So again, if you want us to feature you on the podcast potentially, consider emailing us or submitting your question or story into the voicemail and then in the description of the show. And if it makes sense, we'd love to talk a little bit more about it. So speaking of which, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't go over my own experience. Because as I mentioned, the foundation of my company that's profitable now is built with the bones of many failed ideas and wanting to be an entrepreneur for forever and not really making the leap until I was almost 30. It was brutal. And I think we have to kind of sit and talk about that a little bit more. So my background has been in sales. And side note, you're going to hear probably the dog whining in the background, children screaming at some points. Spider-Man is playing right now on the TV in the other room. You may or may not be able to hear it, but again, for the sake of authenticity, I'm leaving things in. This is just running and gunning, telling stories, and in a brief, succinct manner as much as I can, because I know that we all have limited time. So I'll try to keep these episodes between 20 and 30 minutes for the sake of time. So again, my background has been in sales. I begrudgingly was kind of forced into sales. I got my MBA. It was paid for by the university that I worked for. And so I took the opportunity, but it didn't really help me get a job, ironically enough. I was looking for a job at a point in 2015 when the job market was really oversaturated. It's not like what it is today. So finding the experience needed to get my first job was just this chicken or the egg situation. I was thankfully able to find a sales job with a software company, and that began my foray into SaaS, or software as a solution, software as a service selling. And actually served me well. I found it grew me in a lot of ways because I hated it at first, and I found ways to enjoy it more. And then it became my superpower because I realized there's so many skeezy salespeople that if you have a genuine person who is articulate and actually cares about the customer, that can actually be to your benefit. All that to say, it's been tumultuous, to say the least. The past 4 or 5 years within the software space has been brutal. I mean, just like blood in the streets, brutal. Most of my friends have experienced multiple layoffs. I, for one, have experienced 4 layoffs in about 2.5 years with 3 kids for most of that time. And it was brutal. I will say the only little tip that I can give you all from learning about that whole experience is, I think one thing that I did do right, while it was completely brutal in the moment of interviewing and then, talking to people, getting excited, then getting disappointed to eventually find something, 6 to 8 weeks later, is that I was able to go from essentially frontline worker to VP of sales within like a year and a half, 2 years. And a big part of that is really because I had the layoffs. So, I mean, I started as a senior level account executive, was laid off. I can go into those stories one day if you guys actually want that. But for the time being, laid off as account executive, took another position, kind of created my own position as a manager position, which turned into a director position with another company. So I leveled up one there, helped the company grow, 8x over the course of a few years. That wasn't good enough. They shut everything down from our end, laid off all the employees on our side in what I managed. That led into another position as like a VP of sales role, but it was still kind of in the weeds, still selling with a very small company. But that title and that experience of what I was able to do there after getting laid off there led me into the next role with a little bit larger international startup as a VP of sales. And then there was a whole board dispute with the CEO and the new CEO, and it all just fell apart. And that company now just got sold last year. So again, as you can see, there's a level to it. And that was only because I intentionally knew my worth and was able to market myself well. And I'd say that's a good lesson for entrepreneurship is, those you're going to experience obstacles and stress, and it's not going to go as fast as you think. But if you can intentionally just know what you're good at and lean into those things, oftentimes, the obstacle is the way. Ryan Holiday is really popular around, Stoic philosophy. And that's one of the books he wrote was The Obstacle is the Way. And I think it's a good mentality to have that oftentimes as an entrepreneur, or if you're experiencing layoffs, the opportunity is the challenge that's ahead of you. Sometimes we really try to force our will into a certain direction for what we think is the right decision. But oftentimes, if we could just use the challenges and some of the constraints that we have, those constraints actually give us uniqueness to what we're doing and help us be successful. Because you have different schedules and a different amount of kids and different businesses. So like, I can't give you a template. No one can give you a template for you to just follow and create a successful business. So there's already that level of constraint and unique constraints within all of our situations. But again, if you can kind of use that to your superpower to say, okay, I'm really good at this. I know my skill sets around this thing is strong, but I have this constraint. The constraint kind of paired with where you excel allows you to better keep yourself in a really unique situation. I don't know if that makes sense. So all that to say, 4 layoffs later, I kind of want to go back a few more months before the last layoff, which happened last year, around February. So at the beginning of 2024, I had this business idea. I saw, through the layoffs, speaking of the challenges kind of being the opportunities, I saw in the layoffs that as someone who was selling the software and building teams to sell the software, oftentimes these software companies had such a disconnection between what was built and what was actually being sold and kind of the market demand. Essentially, it's like people are building companies with a ton of money behind them to sell lemonade when it's, freezing cold winter outside, and it really should be hot chocolate. But because the person who's making the lemonade and the person who's selling the lemonade isn't collaborating in kind of the same direction, then there's a complete disconnection between what the market actually wants the product to be, how it's being sold, and where it needs to land and be sold. It's the same with software, essentially. Like the people who are building the software, the people who are marketing the software, the people who are selling the software, and that whole feedback loop was entirely disconnected. And I saw that through the layoffs. That's why a lot of these layoffs were occurring, because people were just building products that no one wanted because they didn't have that whole feedback loop collectively. So I thought, I'll interview while I have a company. I'll part-time interview and pay people who I feel like I can sell a service to get their feedback. These are like chief product officers or CTOs who are leading engineering teams for software companies. And I was trying to understand, again, what were the challenges they were having around creating and selling their solutions? How were things failing? How are they developing new products, and how is that not working? And again, that's another thing that I actually did well, was before I even sold a product, I got market feedback on it to ensure, one, there's a real problem here. I can articulate the solution in their words, and it also shows me what my marketing and sales needs to be. Because after all these interviews, I could talk to another CPO and say, hey, from other CPOs, other product officers, I hear that they have problems in launching products, and what they tell me is this, this, and this. And I can speak their language and tell them their problems, where they go, yeah, that's how I feel too. That is really beneficial for your sales, really beneficial for your marketing, for your landing page, to where you can really make the person feel understood that you're selling it to. And so that's really what I focused on, is that, I was talking to chief product and chief technology officers of, ex Uber and really big corporations and really interesting startups, and garnering a lot of really good feedback about, yeah, there's a real problem between someone launching a new software, and actually getting it up off the ground, even for a lot of these mature startups and mature companies, that it was being done in really a not effective way. That feedback loop that I was talking about was really missing. So where was I going with that? I was going with that to essentially say, this again was happening while I had 3 kids, a full-time job, employees underneath me in that company. And I was also running these interviews on the side, these paid marketing interviews. And I can kind of talk about the paid marketing interviews that I use, because I still use that cadence today, and that still can generate opportunities and sales for you and get you market feedback. So it's a really good cadence that works, so that I'm happy to share with you if you're trying to launch a service or like B2B business. Story for another day. So again, I'm working full time. I have kids. I'm running these interviews, and I'm a Christian. So I was praying, God, I really feel like after having these interviews, I'm actually, my idea is heading in the right direction, and that there's a real need for this. But I don't want to quit my job and leave the employees that I hired at this company, and we're about to hit huge growth numbers. I don't want to leave now. And so I was literally praying, okay, God, like, make it really clear that you want me to pursue this business, and I'll go all in. That was Wednesday. And on Thursday, I got a text from our interim CEO at that company saying there's a huge board dispute and they can't come to a resolution. We can't raise funds, and we cannot pay anyone else. So we're probably going to be laying off most of the company. Complete shock. I just flew out to New York to meet the board and the investors a few weeks prior, and they literally left the conversation shaking my hand saying, we feel so much better about where the direction of the company is going. So I don't know what happened between 2 or 3 weeks, but they went from feeling like, yes, we want to continue investing in this company and we like where it's headed, to a huge dispute and lawsuits being filed against the CEO and the board, and running out of cash, literally just running out of cash. Oh, and by the way, this was when we were about to 10x in revenue. The biggest number that we had prior in regards to revenue, we were going to 10x that within March, and this was February. So that's when I get that text a day later. Hey, we're probably going to lay off most of the employees, most of the company. Stay tuned. They have more meetings, and they confirmed a day later, yep, we're going to lay off almost all the company. And then they eventually laid off the entire company. It was brutal. Be careful what you ask for, is what I'm saying, or pray for. I was on my own And I was either going to, there's one of two options that I had. I either could go back to what I've done prior, which is spend the next 6 to 8 weeks interviewing and trying to get people to hire me, or I could just figure it out over the next few months. This is embarrassing to admit, but I will admit it. You know, we probably had 15,000 in the bank, 15 grand in the bank, maybe 20,000 liquid cash. But we had a HELOC. So that's for those who don't know, that's an equity line of credit. And Dave Ramsey would go nuts. So I knew I had about like 45,000, 50,000 in that HELOC. And I said, you know what? We're going to cut down our expenses, and that should get me 6 months. And I'm going to take the next 6 months based off my savings and what I can pull out of the HELOC. And I am going to figure it out. And the HELOC was on a rental property. So I knew I've been at a really good position to where I have a rental property, very blessed. And ultimately we made enough money in equity that if we needed to, things got tough, we could still sell the rental property and make some money and pay off the loan. So high risk, yes, but it wasn't like it was the equity line on my primary residence. So that's what I did. I said, you know what? I'm going to figure this out along the way. And I'm just going to go head first into the feedback that I have on this company and figure it out. And of course, it takes longer than you think. It was brutal, but it was worth it, of course. And I guess that's where I'll end here, is a little bit of the background of, man, it's been brutal the past year. To get the company to where it is now, where it's profitable, has not been easy. People make it seem like it's easy. It's not. And even just keeping a job has been difficult. Maybe that's where I'll end, is how did I not lose enthusiasm? What is that quote where, it's not about, a success is like about the amount of times you can get knocked down without loss of enthusiasm, something like that. So how did I not lose enthusiasm, or how did I not let it shake my feeling of competency for what I can do, which was sales and growing sales teams? I mean, I really had to look at myself in the mirror and go, is there something that I'm missing? Because most of these layoffs, if not all of them, were outside of my control. A few of them, I guess you could say, were performance related, but shaky causes, let's just say, shaky reasons to lay me off for performance reasons. And again, that could be a story for another time. How I didn't let it shake me is because objectively, I would look at what was the company like before I joined, what was the company after, and almost every time I either set a record with every company that I worked for or won some award. And that may not be relevant to you, but I mean, do you do good work if you're honest with yourself? It sounds harsh, but like, if you really think about it, I mean, you know the answer. I knew the answer. Yeah, it was brutal, and my confidence definitely was shaken at some points in time in going after interview and interview and having 6 to 8 weeks between jobs, sometimes not without any severance. Yeah, there's times I was really sweating. But I knew I'd figure it out. And if I really looked at myself objectively in the stuff that I did at those companies, I set records, and people enjoyed working with me, under me, and alongside of me. They appreciated the work that I did. And so I knew deep down, and that's why I started my own company, was like, if I could just give something that's mine enough focus and attention, then I can figure this out, that the company can be successful. Because if I can come into a company and set records and revenue records and pipeline records and turn a company around within, under a year, then what if I had 3 years or 5 years or 10 or 20 years to develop something on my own? That's why I give myself 6 months. All right, you have 6 months of runway to figure it out. Here's the thing. If you're running a business, if you have 6 months of cash in the business for your runway, no matter what is happening in the business or what trials you experience, you can usually figure things out in 6 months. I knew that I could do the same as well. So we can talk more about how the company pivoted and what those 6 months look like as I was kind of wandering the wilderness, if you want. But just wanted to set the kind of context to it has not been all rosy. Entrepreneurship has been brutal. And I failed at a lot of ideas and even failed at a lot of, just jobs. And that's okay. In the next episode, I'll talk a little bit more about what those 6 months look like as I navigated the idea that I was iterating on and how I eventually got it to profitability. Again, thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if this was of value to you and ask any questions in the email or the voicemail listed below.